Hello and welcome! It's been a wild week of development on Disinherited, with a big overhaul of a super crucial system, some relic fun, and a big overhaul to our spookiest boy, Cilice. If you've been following along, you know all about Cilice by now, but for new people, he's a monk who worships pain on the grounds that pain seems to extend time, and therefore transcendent agony might cause eternal life. We've been hanging around in his area, the Chained Monastery, for a little while, which has 3 enemies right now: the Beaten, the Drawn, and the Shackled. But Cilice himself needs a bit of a visual update, as well as some new ways to murder Samuel. We'll get into all that, but first, the other progress. I'm Dryden Thomas, and this is day 84 of my 100-day quest to finish Disinherited. It's a side-scrolling roguelike where you throw, catch, and parry your way through Death's domain to kill the Grim Reaper and claim eternal life, all to spite your father who wrote you out of his will. First, the most exciting thing that's happened since the last mainline devlog: playtesting has begun. It's hard to believe, but I really haven't let a single person play since the Blackthorn competition ended. I've been so focused on making forward progress, and of course, making videos to show, that it's been really hard to carve out the time to go back and polish the first things. At the moment, it's just my Discord mods, some close friends, and anybody who's above the Skull Brigade tier in my channel memberships. Luckily, the game has been completely perfect and bug-free. Just kidding. My mod Isla rigorously playtested each relic and noticed that the Crystal Skull in particular was obliterating the game every time. This was very odd since it worked for me just fine during development. We noticed that it didn't stop the game from running though, it just froze all the visuals on the screen in place. This led me to believe it was something pertaining to rendering, which makes a little bit of sense since the Crystal Skull's ability is to put a light on all of the enemies. When I designed the relic, I put something in the enemy script that created a light when the object woke up. Apparently, the build didn't like that. So I swapped that light out for a prefab object, and apparently that was just fine. Then my friend Dallas, aka Yum Basil, noticed that if you press roll and then spam the jump key, you can build up an absolutely unreal amount of speed. I've never done that before because that's a wild thing to do. But melee players are built different. It's sort of tough to do by accident, and it doesn't break anything except common sense and the laws of physics, so I'm sort of tempted to just leave it in there and let Zoom Mule become canon. Also, because Dallas has so much skill and genre savvy, I've decided to appoint them as the playtest czar. They're gonna know the game really well, so they can help me filter and prioritize so that I can act on that feedback better. Speaking of priorities, there's a massive overhaul that I did this week. I don't know why you'd remember this, but remember like 8 weeks ago when I said that I was switching over all the audio to Wise? Well, I integrated the software into the project, and it turns out that it overrides all of Unity's sound tools. Obviously, sound is a pretty big deal in games, and it's gotta be there real soon. So this took like 2 entire days, and I might do a full video on this later, but Wise is really not set up for 2D games. I cobbled together some stuff for my last game, Lighthoof, before I really knew what I was doing, but this time I was able to pretty efficiently delve into the Wise scripts and swap everything out so that it works well with the 2D colliders. So now I can do things like this. See how as I pass from one area to another, Samuel hits this collider that changes the reverb that his sounds are run through. This is just a little test, but you sort of get the idea. I really hope that Wise someday includes 2D components with their software. That would be super nice. During those couple days, I wrote a new audio manager that works with Wise. I spent time remembering how to use Wise in the first place because some stuff has changed since I last worked with it. And then I reattached every audio and music event in the game, did a bunch of debugging, and things are now audible again. Although there is still a ton of work to do on the audio front. Also, just to give you an update, we are this close to 7,000 wishlists on Steam. Now, wishlists aren't everything, but they can be a decent predictor of how a game's gonna do at launch. So if you're a Steam user and you want to help the game reach higher algorithmic heights, then please go to Steam and wishlist Disinherited. But really, I think that the best thing a game can have at this stage or any stage is a healthy community with a lot of excitement, which is what we've got here. And there has been no greater sign of that to me than this memeful fan game made by Vanya Braslavets, aka Kitten Lord. I usually feature fan art at the ends of videos, but this is extremely high effort and deserves a slot in the middle. Listen to the music, look at that art, Count the bones! It's also on itch.io, and I've put a link in the description. This completely cracked me up, so thank you very much, Vanya. During this Monday's stream, I implemented what has got to be the most fun relic so far, the pneumatic clogs. These let you bounce off of the heads of enemies for some damage, and it's hilarious. The balance comes in where it's still risky to be that close to that many enemies, and the damage won't be huge unless you upgrade it, but I do plan to make this rather viable. When you have a successful attack, you get a little boost upwards automatically, and it opens up a small window where you can perform a regular jump too. I think you'll find some interesting uses for it. Okay, now for the main event, Cilice's redesign. First, let me show you how he used to look and how his fight used to flow. Here's some footage from the first week he was created. You can see that he sways from side to side, flinging these giant hooks on chains at you, and tries to stab you from the floors and walls. To damage him, you have three options. You can catch the hook and throw it, or you can bash it back if it crosses across. You can also climb the walls to grab a hook right off of the ceiling, carry it across, and then fling it. You have to carry it across because immediately after you let go, it gets yanked back to its starting spot. This was definitely my favorite fight in the original game because I think it incorporated every mechanic that you could do as Samuel pretty well. You could get into a real rhythm of dodging and throwing and reacting, and Cilice himself is spooky and on theme. Still, it's gotta be better for the final release. I started with the visual redesign. After doing some decorations for the monastery, I found the new main color for the area, yellow. Previously, I was kind of going for the most drab possible look for Cilice in the area, as brown as can be, to imply this sort of ascetic austerity. But a religion needs to inspire, to have a goal and an identity in order to be compelling, and a figurehead like Cilice should look a little bit grander, I think. So I upgraded his appearance to be more priestly, and incorporated the emblem of the monastery, that right triangle pointing up toward the heavens. As before, his arms are twisted into a praying posture and bound behind his back. His chains are now golden, and he has a gold nail apparently driven into his head. Don't ask about the biology of this, he is one of Death's severed souls now. I also just cleaned up the line work and shading, and also separated out his mouth on the model so I can animate it. His old hooks also now felt somewhat out of step with the new design, and also someone said they looked more like anchors. So I went ahead and redesigned these as well, using the emblem of the monastery as inspiration. And then, of course, I had to add some blood running down them. I like them looking more angular like this. I think the straight lines kind of reflects the rigidity of his ideology. The animation work went really hard this week too. I had this dream that I could get some physics-based movement going for the cloth, the spine, and the hair, but it didn't end up working out very well. Finally, I learned about animation blending layers. Now, if you're a 3D dev, you're probably like, yeah, obviously. But I've been working with sprite sheets up to this point, and you can't blend them in the same way that you can with 3D models. Animation blending lets you take the positions and rotations of the bones in different animations and move them to a midpoint between them. You can then use something called a blend tree to use something like the velocity of the thing being animated and calculate what positions each bone should be in based on that. After creating animations for the cloth and hair for the four main directions, I plugged them into this blend tree, and now when he moves, the dangling pieces seem to respond to the direction. Another animation detail that got some love are these chains. These chains are drawn by calculating a simple spline and then arranging the points of a line renderer along that spline. But under certain conditions, it was behaving kind of weirdly, so I had to keep Cilice fairly stationary to not call attention to it. But now I have something that works way better. I added this parameter to the line renderer connector about whether the line responds to gravity, and if so, by how much. This does a pretty simple thing. It just makes the curve always bend downward. But there was another element that was bothering me. As the chains stretched, the links were looking like they were stretching too. And I didn't want that to happen. By using the length of the curve as another parameter, I could manipulate the scaling of the chain texture so the links always stayed the same. And finally, there's this last detail which I'm sure nobody would notice but me, but I had to deal with it. See how when I move the hook, the chain almost seems like it's growing out of the hook rather than out of the wall? Yeah, I'm not a big fan of that. To combat this, I added another parameter that I can tune to adjust the tiling on the chain texture as it stretches, because I just couldn't let it go. Now, it doesn't all work out perfectly if you're looking super duper carefully, but all of this adds up to make the illusion that much more convincing. Cilice himself also got 2 more attacks. Now, if you've been watching the devlogs really closely, I'm sure you can make some guesses as to what they are. We know that I like to introduce the new mechanics with the enemies in the area and then have the boss use them all against you. So Cilice's first new attack is the Shriek of Agony that the Drawn uses. This attack doesn't do as much damage as throwing the ceiling hooks at you, but if it hits, it immediately drains you of all of your stamina and makes it so that you move slower, you can't wall climb, and you can't dodge roll. Which is extremely scary when he can follow it up by stabbing you through the floor. During the windup for this attack, he moves to a random one of 4 points within the room. This makes use of all that work I did with the cloth and the chain animations, and it gives the fight a little bit more dynamic of a feel. I did definitely have to shrink the size of that hitbox though from when the Drawn uses it, because there were times when it was literally inescapable. The next attack, as you might have already predicted, chains you up if it hits you. Now there's a lot of different ways I could have executed this attack, but in the end, I figured Cilice was kind of missing 2 things. 1, a melee attack that you could parry and would help stun him, and 2, a quick short-range attack that would make you feel a lot less safe standing next to him and just bashing away. So I made it this short, quick-range thing. This attack is just scary as hell to me and reminds me of the spider influence that was in his design from the beginning. For this, I took the chains right off of the shackled and reanimated them to be different. If you are unfortunate enough to be too close, you get bound up and you have to button mash to escape, which is terrifying for all the same reasons as getting hit by the Shriek of Agony is. But hey, nobody said that fighting a boss that worships pain was gonna be a nice time. But you know what is a nice time? Looking at fan art. If you've created anything Disinherited related, please do submit it to the forum. I'm putting a link to the forum in the description of each video from now on. And thank you so much to all of our channel members, especially AJ Havoc and Ironic You Ask, who are the members of the Reaper Council level. On a final note, there are now 322 submissions for the minigame contest, and the last day to submit is today, the upload date of this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. It's been a wild week of development on Disinherited. Why can't I remember the name of my own game?